Mercedes has managed to push Ferrari off the board as the second fastest team and is now looking for its first win of the season. This is something that hasn't happened from 2011 on, and Hamilton hasn't had a winless season throughout his whole F1 career. Their next huge hope is in Brazil, and although the team is looking for an improved pace, they're going to meet a much bigger issue than in Mexico. What is this issue exactly? Can they do something to fix it? And what does the team have to say about it? Before we dive deep into that, make sure to like our video, subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications. During the last two GPs, Mercedes found some great pace and were able to finish P2 with Hamilton in both of these events. However, the team's goal is to win at least one race in the season, with the next chance being available to them in the upcoming weekend in Brazil. Although the team enters this racing event with great hope, there is lots of analysis that needs to be done inside the team's garage, such as their tactics and shot calling. These two crucial factors in a race led to Mercedes missing the first win of the season in Mexico, which is basically the lesser evil that Mercedes will face for the upcoming GP. Shot calling and strategies are things that Mercedes isn't really agile and versatile at. Most of the time, the team is hoping that they'll be the fastest car on the grid, which they were in the previous 8 seasons, and therefore there's no need for them to intervene or change something mid-race. However, now that their reign is over and the team has much bigger and stronger competitors in Red Bull and Ferrari, this is something they would have to address right away. The Mexico GP showed us that the drivers wanted one thing but received another. It was likely that Mercedes hoped that Red Bull would have to make one more pit stop due to the fact that they were set to complete 40+ laps on the medium compound tyre. Although it seemed impossible at first glance, this was accomplished by both Red Bull drivers, with Perez even threatening to take away the P2 spot from Hamilton. At one point, he was just plus 0.03 seconds away from the DRS being active, which would have brought him much closer to Hamilton at the end of the main straight. The strategies are something that Toto Wolff spoke about after the Mexico GP, adding, "We were pressured with Lewis to do that pit early. We didn't think that the medium would go until the end. It was totally surprising the way Perez hammered the tyre and it was still holding on. So we just got it wrong. We discussed whether the soft-hard combination was a viable one-stop strategy, and we thought it's never going to go that far, so the soft-medium wasn't even on the radar. But this is something that a team can learn from and change for the next race. That is why we said that this is the lesser evil that Mercedes need to address for the upcoming GP, because this is something they can adapt to. However, there is one aspect that they are going to struggle with during the Brazilian GP, and that is the altitude of this race. How so? Stick around with us to find out more. The Mexican GP is at 2,285 meters above sea level, meaning that the air is very rarefied. With rarefied air, the cars are struggling with cooling requirements, aerodynamics, and just overall performance in general. So there are two problems that Mercedes are going to face at the next GP in Brazil, which, although at 700 meters above sea level is much lower than the Mexican one, will present a massive challenge for Mercedes. The first issue is with their own car. As you probably remember, throughout the Mexico GP, Hamilton was constantly complaining about engine cuts. True, his race pace was awesome and he was able to keep up with Verstappen very closely, but that doesn't mean that the rarefied air in Brazil won't present a significant challenge for the Brackley-based team. Why? Because the number one reason why Hamilton's engine was suffering from these cuts was the rarefied air in Mexico. According to Mercedes' head of strategy, James Vowles, this is an issue that all teams will suffer from due to the nature of the track and the challenges that the sea level provides to the teams. He also added that this issue is mostly felt in the qualifying session where, to be honest, Mercedes had a legitimate chance of taking the second pole position this season hadn't it been for Russell's mistake at the end of the lap. How does the rarefied air mess with the power of the engine? Simple enough. When the driver requests throttle and picks it up, the power is not delivered quickly enough due to the fact that there isn't enough concentration of air to deliver that amount of power in that amount of time. You might think that the air in Brazil is rarefied in smaller percentages and that this challenge won't be a real one, and you might be right. The teams never know how their engines will behave prior to going to that race. Simulators are one thing, but experiencing the track in real life is a whole other thing. But what would be the second problem that Mercedes faces? Obviously, the fiercest rivals in 2022 will be Ferrari. The Maranello team had an awful race in Monaco, qualifying and finishing P5 and P6 respectively. One of the reasons why Ferrari struggled so much with pace is the high altitude of the track, as we also saw when they weren't able to extract maximum power out of their engine throughout the Spa GP. According to Binotto, there is more behind the engine struggles for Ferrari in Mexico, but nevertheless, he thinks that the team will be back stronger than ever in Brazil. This is a track that has naturally suited Red Bull in the past, and back in 2021, Wolff said that the Interlagos GP isn't really one that brought a lot of success to his team. Now, with the new regulations and with Ferrari battling for the P2 spot in the Constructors' Championship, it goes without saying that Mercedes will face a huge difficulty being at the top of the podium. James Vowles also spoke about Ferrari and Red Bull's pace in Interlagos, saying that he has certain expectations out of them and how they will perform throughout this weekend's race event. One of the reasons why he doesn't expect Mercedes to be as competitive as in Mexico is the low downforce requirement of the track, which isn't really suiting the W13 throughout this season. Initially, Vowles spoke about why the W13 looked like it found some amazing pace throughout the season, pinpointing two factors as the main ones. I think there are a few factors that came together at the same time. The first is that we put a large update kit on in Austin, and that did move us forward, and that evidence was even more present really in Mexico. The second is that we are very good when we are running maximum downforce and others running maximum downforce as well, and that was evident in Zandvoort, in Budapest for example, and it was no different in Mexico. How it performs across the next two is hard to tell. Obviously, in the case of Mexico, it looked a little bit like that Ferrari actually dropped back, and I suspect that won't be the case as we move forward. However, Vowles hopes that Mercedes will be anywhere near Red Bull or Ferrari in the race are very slim, and coming from two GPs that they were able to finish P2 with Hamilton, this isn't the right mindset or expectations to have. I think this will really vary track on track. Ferrari won't be that far back and away from us as they were in Mexico. They will be closer in Brazil and in Abu Dhabi, and it will be a very close fight between our two teams. In terms of relative to Red Bull, they still hold the edge relative to us. I don't think it's quite the 3/10 they outqualified us by, but it will be a few tenths across the next few races. It's really hard to tell before we go to an event, but I don't think we will quite enjoy the same level of competitiveness. It won't be much different, but it might be a slight step backwards, and I certainly expect Ferrari to be closer than they were in Mexico. On top of this, Vowles said that they are enjoying tracks with high amount of downforce, and coming into Brazil, we're not going to see a high downforce setup from Mercedes due to the nature of the track. Therefore, Mercedes' battle with Ferrari for P2 has gotten even worse for the Brackley-based team. A couple of days ago, Wolff was asked as to what he prefers: first win of the season or P2 spot in the Constructors' Championship. He said the former would mean that the team is back on track, so that is what they're going to chase in the last two races. This would be an impossible challenge given the fact that Red Bull are not here to mess around and Ferrari will be much more competitive throughout the weekend. The race is supposed to be a rainy one, meaning that we can see a lot of surprises and interesting finishes on the podium. What do you think about Mercedes and their struggles? Let us know in the comments below.